Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Chiakos. I'll be your moderator, and I can do a quick intro of the speakers before we get into the presentation. My name is Michael Chiakos. I'll be giving a short intro, and then we will be going to Sigal Michael, who's a sustainability coordinator for the city of Burlingame. Then Janelle London, co-executive director for Cultura, and then Carlos Huizar, planning associate for the city of Torrance. And I'll be giving just a quick intro about electric vehicles and why they're important. Maybe I'll just launch into it while we wait for Kelsey to get the slides up. So I work for Community Environmental Council, and we are a nonprofit think and do tank that was formed in 1970. And for the last 50 years, we've been working on solutions to environmental issues, including the last 15 years focused entirely on climate and clean energy. And as part of that work, my team, the energy and transportation work, has played a pivotal role in accelerating electric vehicle adoption on the central coast of California. We've done that through our group, and if you can go to the next slide, through our group, Electric Drive 805. This is a partnership of, let's see. I think this one doesn't have my slides. Kelsey?
My apologies, Michael. I do not know where your slides are. Let me just try and find them.
Does Gabby or Serena have the final deck that I emailed? Maybe they could just share their screen.
One moment.
Thank you. That looks great. So yes, Electric Drive 805 is a partnership of CEC and the air pollution control districts of Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo counties, as well as other partners. And we've been working over the last 10 years to accelerate EV adoption, working on everything from grants that have been funded by the California Energy Commission for siting and large events, green car shows, the largest of which has 35,000 people and hundreds of ride and drives. Also do work at the California Public Utilities Commission on transportation electrification. So we have a broad range of experience in accelerating electric vehicles. Really excited to see some of the insights that our panelists bring to us today. Next. Can I have the next slide? So why electric vehicles? Well, really because transportation, especially in California, is the lion's share of emissions, about 50%. You can see in this pie chart from the Air Resources Board that transportation is 41% of our carbon emissions. But in fact, there's another 10% that are upstream emissions from the industrial sector. So everything from oil drilling to refining that oil. So 50% of emissions economy-wide. And also for many households, transportation is about 50% of their individual carbon emissions. So it's very critical that we redesign our cities so that we use cars less. And CEC has a whole Drive Less initiative, as well as our Drive Clean initiative to switch to electric vehicles. One average gas car emits about 5 metric tons of CO2 per year. And by switching to an electric vehicle, we can move that to 0 to 1 metric tons, depending on the source of electricity. And I like to, when people learn that just their driving is equivalent to all the other environmental impacts that they do, it's kind of shocking to them, and that one large change could have a huge impact. And I like to associate it with some common things. We've heard that eating meat, especially beef, has a huge carbon impact, and the equivalent of eating one cheeseburger is about 10 miles of carbon emissions in a gasoline car. Manufacturing an iPhone is about 200 miles. And flying, which is the easiest way to use a lot of carbon very quickly, LA to Japan would be about 3850 miles in a gasoline car. Next. So electric vehicles can be a big part of the solution along with driving less. And this is because they're extremely efficient. The EPA rates many of them over 100 miles per gallon equivalent, and they're 3 times more energy efficient than a gasoline car. If you think about it intuitively, it makes sense. There's none of that pollution coming out of the tailpipe, the heat, the vibration, the exhaust, the noise. All of that wasted energy goes into moving the EV down the road. They produce 0 tailpipe emissions, which is really important for our air pollution control district partners and very important for reducing air pollution in our cities. An EV also reduces greenhouse gas emissions by 75 to 100%, depending on how clean the electricity supply is. And as we know, California is moving to 100% carbon-free electricity by 2045. Many community choice organizations and other power providers are getting there even quicker by 2025 or 2030. So EVs actually get cleaner as they age and our grid cleans up. This is in contrast to gasoline cars, which get dirtier as emissions components fail, as well as the source of our oil is getting dirtier. Here in Santa Barbara County, we have a lot of cyclic steaming for oil, and then there's also fracking and tar sands and dirtier and dirtier oil as it gets harder to get. So we call this transition to electric vehicles powered by renewable energy driving on sunshine, which is a really great way to summarize the benefits of electric vehicles. Next. So EV sales are definitely increasing, but a lot more effort is needed. And it looks like EV sales in California may have stalled out the last few years at 8 to 9% of new vehicle sales, which is great, but we need to do much better. In California, you can see the last in the chart here, Q1 2021, we've sold almost 60,000 EVs. And so it looks like we'll have a banner year this year and we'll pass 1 million electric vehicles sold in California. So it's pretty amazing to go from 0 to 1 million in about a decade. The US, there's about 2 million electric vehicles sold. California is almost half the market. But globally, we're seeing Europe and China really lead. In California, you've heard about the Governor Newsom's executive order for a gas car ban by 2035. That's a great development. And then just on Thursday, President Biden released an executive order with a target of 50% electric vehicle sales by 2030 nationwide. So these are huge policy movers that will really help to increase electric vehicles. Next. For my last slide, I'm just going to share a few of the lessons that we've learned in the last decade of EV adoption before we pass it over to the panelists. The first one is that electric vehicle events really matter. We try to do a green car show in each county every year. We should really be doing them 1 or 2 in each city of every community in California every year. And this is where they can also be very small. The local governments could work with a few electric vehicle owners who are really great volunteers that will go out to community events and have owners' corners where they show a few of their personal electric vehicles, talk to their neighbors about the benefits of driving. They are often much more informed and great EV champions than trying to get dealers to come out to your EV events. We've also done a lot of EV 101 lunch and learns and webinars, particularly with the pandemic. We're finding a lot of success with webinars. I used to go out and occasionally every year or two give a presentation at a large employer like UC Santa Barbara, and having 40 or 50 people show up would be an amazing turnout. Well, we've had over 900 people sign up for EV 101 webinars, and we've really leveraged emails from large employers. A lot of counties or big educational institutions that have carbon neutrality or climate goals will send out an email to all of their employees, which gets a lot of people there, as well as city or county newsletters. Great way to get the word out with very little cost. We've worked on electric vehicle marketing, education, and outreach grants, and it's really important. I think EVs are poised right now for them to work for most people, particularly if they have charging at home or in their workplace, but we really need to get the word out. Each time someone chooses a gas car instead of that electric vehicle, we're stuck with that gas car for the next 10 or 20 years. I also want to point out that counties are really important to drive EV adoption, and that policy matters. For Santa Barbara County in their fleet, they just had a few electric vehicles, and eventually we had to go up to the board of supervisor level, and they really pushed it forward that we're only going to purchase electric vehicles for light duty now. And this year they're putting in 84 EV chargers, 3 DC fast chargers, and 56 EVs. Counties are very well positioned for EV adoption because they have social services and probation, all these employees that drive all around the county. So you can electrify their own fleet, as well as getting chargers for employees can be very beneficial, because many counties and large cities have workplaces all throughout the county. And these people, if they can be convinced to drive an electric vehicle, come from all socioeconomic groups, they can be the first EVs on the block and create this network effect where they really help their friends and coworkers and colleagues learn about electric vehicles. So those are some of my quick lessons learned, and I'm gonna pass it on to our next speaker. Sigal Michael is the sustainability coordinator for the city of Burlingame. And she manages climate action, EV, renewable energy, waste reduction, and resource conservation projects for the city. Take it away, Sigal.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Thanks for setting the stage on why EVs are important. And Burlingame is a small city in the San Francisco Bay Area along the peninsula, but we have a relatively high number of EV vehicles registered in our town. And as a sustainability coordinator, I'm getting emails all the time from different opportunities for EV charging. So we decided to come up with an EV action plan. Next slide, please, to help focus us on where we want to invest in our EV charging in the town. So our first goal, you could click please, is to align with state targets. Like Michael mentioned, there's a executive order for all new vehicles to be zero emission by 2035, and we want to be able to support that. We also want to electrify our municipal fleet, which is a challenge because most of our vehicles are bigger trucks that don't necessarily have electric counterparts to them. Next slide. Click. Yes, perfect. We also want to prioritize providing access to all our residents. EV drivers tend to charge at home, and in Burlingame, 52% of our housing stock is multifamily, and a majority of that was built before 1950. So we have an old housing stock that could be especially challenging for installing EV charging stations or just access because of power capacity, landlords agreements, and space issues. So this plan is really meant to provide a blueprint on how we could support multifamily charging and prioritize where EV charging should occur in our city, and to overall promote EVs. Next slide, please. So our goal, you could click again, is to install 100 charging ports. You could see just on that image, we have about 40 or 36 in our city now, and we'd like to put in 100 by 2030. Those are public charging ports. And you could click again to have 5,000 registered EVs. Right now we have about half that much, and to grow our municipal fleet to be 10% electric. Now, just by reaching 5,000 registered EVs, we'll be saving 13,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, which is equivalent to 1.4 million gallons of gasoline. So that just gives you an idea of the carbon impact of these goals. Next slide. This is a map of Burlingame, and I circled here our 2 city centers where we have 2 downtown areas where we currently have our EV charging. And we, in green, those are our existing EV stations. And those areas also show our most dense areas of multifamily buildings. So we're really trying to increase and provide access to those neighborhoods. And also the red ones, the red stations show our future priority locations to support commuters, car sharing, the hotels along that strip of Bayside Park. You may notice we have a lot of hotels. So we're really trying to provide access for everyone. But the two circles really emphasize the multifamily locations in our city. Next slide. So some of our policies and how we're approaching this challenge in our EV action plan is last year we adopted a REACH code, which requires EV station charging in all new development. All single family residents must have an EV ready to go station charger. All multifamilies need to provide either level 2 or level 1 access to every unit in the building. And all new commercial buildings need to provide a certain percentage of EV charging in their parking. We also have streamlined parking permitting in our city that makes it pretty swift for people to request permits for EV charging and to receive them in the next day or so. We're looking constantly at grants. There's now if you're familiar with the Cali VIP, is our largest grant opportunity that we recently received for new fast chargers that we like to put at our main library, which are especially costly for cities. And we're also always on the lookout for innovation. San Mateo County, our county, is looking at a curbside charging pilot, which could be really interesting, especially for multifamily buildings, to offer charging just on street parking. Next slide. And you could click about 5 times here. These are our strategies for multifamily buildings. First is we'd like to let residents know that EV charging is available in the neighborhood. We just completed a parking lot with 24 new chargers, and we're going to send out postcards to the neighborhood to make sure they know about this access. And if they were thinking about EVs, now this could be the push to make them decide to go. Also, as I mentioned before, all new multifamily buildings must offer charging access for all units. We're also looking at ways to offer incentives for multifamily and exploring grant opportunities and engaging with property owners. And I'd also like to emphasize that e-mobility is growing. It's not just about providing access to charge electric cars, but we're going to be continuing to see e-bikes and e-scooters as options for residents and to make sure they have a way to plug those in. Last slide. So this is our website. If you'd like to take a look at the EV action plan, please feel free to do so. Copy it, share it. It's not a big document. It's not thick. It's really meant to be a working document, something that we could quickly look at what strategies we need to stay on top of and refer to, and with our goals nice and clear. So I encourage you to take a look, and please feel free to contact me with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sigal. Next, we have Janelle London, who's the co-executive director of the nonprofit Cultura, the executive director of joint venture Silicon Valley's Beyond Gasoline initiative. And she also published the first op-ed in California calling for a phase out of gasoline-powered vehicles, and now it's happening. So look forward to your presentation, Janelle.
All right, thanks everybody. It's great to be here. Next slide, please. So my nonprofit Cultura, and in my role in joint venture Silicon Valley, I'm looking at something very important, which is the need to cut our emissions from gasoline use, basically from transportation. So you may be aware that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just put out a new report reiterating its urgent cry that we really have to cut all emissions across the globe in half by 2030. Cut all emissions in half by 2030. And President Biden has also called for, in the US, cutting emissions from all sectors in half, or 50 to 52% by 2030. In California, Governor Newsom is looking at cutting, going carbon neutral by 2035 possibly, or 2045 at the latest. So when you think about the light duty vehicle sector doing its fair share, what we need to do is cut emissions from that sector, our cars, trucks, and SUVs, in half by 2030. And what that really means, what that translates into, is cutting our gasoline use in half by 2030. Next slide. So how are we doing on that? Well, in California, pre-pandemic, not great. We've been hovering around 15 billion gallons of gas per year. We had a slight dip in the pandemic, but we're now roaring back to our previous gasoline sales. So we need to be bending this curve deeply downwards. Next slide, please. All right, so President Biden announced a new target, which is half of new car sales should be EVs by 2030. It sounds great, but when you break it down, you see there's a weird disconnect. Remember that Biden has called for a cut of emissions in half by 2030. And half of new car sales is the word half, so it sounds great, but when you think about new car sales versus the cars on the road, we have 288 million cars in the US. Click, please. Okay, and about 1 million today are EVs. Click, please. About 12 million cars are retired each year. Click, please. And 17 million new cars come on the road each year. So 17 million new cars, half of those would be, and I'm rounding up, 9 million EVs. Click, please. And so let's say we have a total of 10 million EVs. Click, please. So click, please. That was the 1 million. The green is 1 million EVs already. Click, please. Click again. Oh, that's the minus 12 million. Click again. That's the adding 17 million. Click again. Okay, let's just say for fun that back up, please. That 25 million of those are EVs. Still, we're going to have 90% of cars on the road burning gas. So that's not going to reach that cutting emissions in half by 2030. We're going to have to do more. Next slide, please. In California, Governor Brown set a goal that we have 5 million EVs on the road by 2030. And this is a great website put out by the California Energy Commission that shows how many total vehicles we have. And you see that there's about 28 million total vehicles in California. So 5 million on the road is still going to be more than 75% of cars burning gas. And off to the right, I have a picture of somebody hanging by a thread. So I know we've mentioned that right now, California has an executive order that by 2035, all new car sales will be electric vehicles. But Gavin Newsom issued that order, and his ability to stay as our governor is hanging by a thread. The recall election is very tight right now, 50-50. If he goes, that 2035 executive order is probably going to be one of the first things to go. So it's not really set in stone. Next slide, please. All right, so we know we have this emissions cut that we just have to achieve, and the light duty vehicle sector has to do its part. So what do EVs have to do with that? Next slide, please. So really, we use the term EV and we think about EVs, but really they're just a proxy for reducing gasoline use. We're assuming in a lot of situations that every EV is alike, and that if we just get an EV on the road, somehow we're removing or displacing some gasoline that was being burned before. But when you really think about it, all EVs are not the same. So this is a graph showing what happens when you convert a driver to an EV. So at the top, let's take a driver who goes to, say, Trader Joe's every day. Maybe they drive 2,500 miles a year. If you convert them to an EV, you're saving 75 gallons of gas. Then you think about somebody who drives 30,000 miles a year and burns 1,500 gallons of gasoline. Well, if you convert that driver to an EV, you're saving 1,500 gallons of gas. And then you think about somebody who was a bike rider and they decide to get an EV. Well, you're not saving any gasoline that way. So the important thing is to start thinking through the lens of gasoline cuts or gasoline displacement. Every EV is not alike. Okay, next slide, please. So current EV incentives, so like tax cuts in the federal government or rebates from California, they're all issued the same for every EV, regardless of how much gasoline is used. My nonprofit has just done a report saying, we might need to change that. Next slide, please. And so it looks like the colors didn't come through on this, but that's okay. So when we're talking about EV adoption as cities, we need to start thinking about this in a new way. We need to start thinking about gasoline displacement. Next slide, please. So in our report, we found that across the US, it turns out that the top 10%, if you divide up all drivers by how much gasoline they burn, the top 10% burn about a third of all the gasoline. So now we know there's a group of drivers who we may want to focus on if we really want to cut gasoline use quickly. And they burn more than the bottom 60% of all drivers put together. Next slide, please. So what do we know about these gasoline super users? I can tell you that they tend to drive larger vehicles like SUVs and pickup trucks. Next slide, please. Their expenditures on gasoline, as you might guess, given that they're burning 1,500 gallons a year, are much more than a regular family. So they're an enormous percent of their family's income, about 8%. And if they're low income drivers, as many of them are, it can be up to 20% of their total income. Next slide, please. So here's the great thing about thinking in terms of trying to incentivize the biggest gasoline users to switch to EVs. Today, the people who drive EVs in the green bar on the far right, by and large, are some of the wealthiest people in the US. Whereas if you look at the gasoline super users, these folks in the top 10% of gasoline burners, you can see that their income level is much more aligned with household incomes in general. And in fact, you meet both equity and climate goals by focusing on these folks who are driving the most and getting them to convert to EVs. So if you can incentivize those folks, so we have as an example, give them $10 per gallon you were annually burning of gasoline to switch to an EV. So if they're burning 1,500 gallons of gasoline, they get $15,000 to get a new EV. Anyway, this is much more equitable than the current EV incentives, and it meets our the climate urgency. Next slide, please. So what can cities do? Whoops, okay, my words fell off that slide. What can cities do about this? Well, you know, cities aren't usually able to give out EV incentives, but what you can do is start figuring out in your city, who are the gasoline super users? Invite folks, entice them to come to focus groups and figure out who they are and what are their needs. So we talk about like, oh, we should get EV charging for all multifamily dwellings. Well, let's focus on the ones that are actually the folks burning the most gasoline and can convert them first. That'll be the way to really make sure that we're cutting gasoline with the speed that we need to do it. Next slide, please. And what else can you do? It's really important to track how much gasoline is being sold from city gas stations, and how can the city actually, instead of setting EV goals, consider setting gasoline reduction goals. Because remember, EVs in and of themselves aren't necessarily displacing gasoline, which is the thing that we actually need to do. So let's set goals around actually displacing gasoline. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. Up, back up. One more back, please. Okay, so it's very easy to figure out if your city's cutting gasoline sales. The California Energy Commission posts on its website for every year by city how much gasoline was sold and how many gas stations your city had. So you can take a look and see, is your city on track to cutting gasoline sales in half by 2030, and consider setting a goal around that and really publicizing it to all the residents. Look, we're trying, we gotta cut our gasoline consumption. If we're not cutting this, we're not actually meeting the needs of the climate crisis. So that's another area to focus on. All right, thanks everybody. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Janelle. Next, we have Carlos Huizar, who is a planning associate and manages the sustainability initiative for the city of Torrance. Carlos is currently working on the climate adaptation plan and advancing the planned expansion of the city's EV charging program into fleet applications. Take it away, Carlos.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks everybody for joining this presentation. I'm very proud to be able to share with you the City of Torrance pilot program, the 1 Mile 1 Charger project. Next slide, please. This pilot program started as an effort of through our strategic plan committee, which is composed of different stakeholder groups and our residents of Torrance. And one of the key focuses of the strategic plan is stewardship of the environment. So looking at improving air quality as well as alternative energy sources, and really improve the environment for the city. And then within that was established 2 key performance indicators that the city within a 10-year period established 3 public alternative fueling sites and then facilitate that infrastructure for public use. The goal for the 1 Mile 1 Charger program of to meet with this goal is to improve air quality, but also to be able to facilitate that infrastructure to where a resident, visitor, or employee of the city of Torrance wasn't no more than 1 mile away from an accessible public EV station. Next slide, please. So in order for us to be able to better understand the demand and need for alternative energy, more specifically electric vehicle charging stations, we needed to come up with a robust and innovative way to obtain public input. And one of those ways that we're able to do that is using GIS or geographic information system technology to be able to reach a wide spectrum of audiences. So the city, in partnership with our GIS team, was able to establish this outreach called plug pin maps. So essentially we would go out to different city sponsored events, as well as be able to advertise that on our website and solicit input from the community members and where they felt public EV stations should be located at. And we had this color coded based on preference. So they would give us 3 options or 3 locations and where they felt was the best location. And then based on those findings, we were able to essentially prepare a pilot program to better understand where the need is throughout the city. Next slide, please. So a lot of the suggested locations that our residents as well as other stakeholders have provided us was that they would like public EV stations at locations such as malls or regional shopping centers, close proximity to large employment centers or business parks, close to our hospitals, access to government offices, including our civic center, close to tourist destinations such as our local beaches and local parks, our downtown area, and even in locations that was in close proximity to freeways for employee base that commute into Torrance for their jobs. Next slide, please. So being able to get that public outreach completed, we did have a couple of findings. The majority of the individuals that participated in our public outreach supported EV infrastructure. They did provide us, with essentially an assurance that they were in the way to cover the cost, that they were okay for a driver fee to be initiated as part of the program. And then they also shared with us some common concerns with EV infrastructure, since it was fairly new at the time that we started. There's a lot of common concerns with range anxiety, so that EV vehicles may not provide the same range as a typical combustible gasoline vehicle, the cost of owning an EV vehicle, as well as the additional equipment that may be needed to install a charging station at home. Next slide, please. So with all the information that we were able to obtain through our public outreach, we were able to prepare an application to pursue grant funding from the Mobile Source Reduction Committee and the California Energy Commission, and get City Council to approve that application and support for EV infrastructure. Within that grant application, we were able to secure funding to support the installation of 14 level 2 chargers and 6 level 3 DC fast charging stations. So for the phase 1 of our pilot program, we selected 6 sites based on the input from the community. So those locations are at a couple of the different park locations throughout the city, our downtown Torrance district, as well as our civic center. And the exact placement of these stations would essentially be dictated by the following: the proximity to power source, what would be the highest accessibility for maximum usage of these stations, what would be the least destructive to the existing environment or the existing use of the location to which it was going to be installed at. And then coordination with different city departments, because we do have to coordinate with our general services department for the installation of the charging stations, as well as with community services, which that department is in charge of the maintenance of our local city parks. Next slide, please. As part of obtaining the grant funding, we did have to create a RFP, a request for proposals for a vendor that will install the charging stations and operate the stations on behalf of the city. So the city did spend about 5 to 6 months undergoing the RFP process, interviewing interested vendors, getting a better understanding of their capability. And we ultimately ended up awarding that contract to ChargePoint. So our ChargePoint operates the public EV stations for the city of Torrance. And this RFP granted an initial award contract of 3 years with 1-year extensions. Next slide, please. So as part of this pilot program, we also, because it is a pilot program, we wanted to kind of model this so that the program itself would be self-sustaining. So the way that our funding model works for our EV station is we obtained the grant funding from 2 different grant sources, as well as city matching funds to provide the funding for the installation of the charging stations, which in turns we generate revenue from the usage of the EV charging stations through the driver fees revenue. That's basically the fees that we charge for the drivers to charge their vehicles at the stations, and then utilizing different incentives and rebates. So the city of Torrance participates in the low carbon fuel standard program, in which for the offset of greenhouse gases that these EV charging stations essentially will save, we're able to sell those credits and essentially get revenue in return. And then the revenue base that we earn from the charging stations essentially goes to cover operation and maintenance costs of these stations. So other cities, just as a side note, other cities do have utility taxes that may be able to fund the infrastructure for EV charging stations. But since this is still a pilot program for the city of Torrance, we have not got into that stage yet, but that may be something we, to consider in the future. Next slide, please. One of the great things about using ChargePoint as one of our vendors is that they provide us with the capabilities to kind of do further data analysis in terms of the individuals that are charging in our stations as an individual level as well as a cumulative level. So within the entire operation timeframe, we initially started operating our charging stations of September of 2015 to now to the present. We've had a total of 52,734 sessions, and that's across 6 locations throughout the city, across different level 2 and then DC fast charging stations. Next slide, please. So by seeing the high demand, increased demand in charging stations, as we're seeing an exponential increase in sessions, we're also able to see how much energy we're actually dispensing to the vehicles, as well as seeing the reduction of greenhouse gases. So within the entire operation of our stations, we're able to see that we've reduced a large amount of greenhouse gases, about 179,000 kilotons of emissions. And then energy we're able to dispense, we dispense at about 300, a little bit over, a little bit under 400 megawatts of energy. So as you can see in our diagram that we're showing on the screen, there is a huge, increase that we're getting from the public and being interested in using our stations. And we're also seeing that there's also a huge demand and interest in EV vehicles. And in terms for the city, we're noticing that essentially the city has to be able to keep up with that demand. And eventually we'll be focusing on, increasing our base as well as installing more charging stations. So we do see this as a very successful pilot program. It definitely has met a need, and it's something that we need to work towards expanding. Next slide, please. So as part of, this program, because one of the goals is to make sure that we're no more than 1 mile away from a charging station. With our public stations, because we're looking at 6 different sites, we also have private developments that's also have incorporated EV infrastructure in their properties. So as of July of 2021, about 98.6% of the city is now within coverage where anyone is within 1 mile away from a charging station. We are working with private development as well as with, our interdepartment team to be able to expand on that. And then we do have planned, or they're currently in construction stations, and that should increase that coverage to 99.6%. So we do see this as a very successful program in which now we're going to be focusing on electrifying our fleet. Next slide, please. So now we're going into phase 2 and beyond. And the city recently acquired funding for this portion of the program where we're going to be installing 16 level 2 chargers for the city fleet. Most of our fleets are now either hybrid or fully electric. And as we're retiring older vehicles, we'll be transitioning those vehicles into electric vehicles. In order to save time and kind of learn from, our past experience, the city is using a Sourcewell contract with ChargePoint that will allow us to save time with avoiding an RFP process and allow us to get started with the planning and construction phase of these new stations. And we do hope that our plan is to have these stations installed by December 2022. And these will be able to support our existing electric fleet, as well as any future fleets that we end up purchasing down the road. Next slide, please. The city of Torrance is very proud to be part of this initiative. We definitely see a value towards electrifying vehicles and providing that alternative energy option. We could not have done it without the city council, as well as with our partners, especially the South Bay Council of Governments, which provided us with technical assistance in being able to get this pilot program started. And I look forward to being able to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. So now we're getting into the Q&A section of this webinar. And since I'm the moderator, I'll take the moderator's privilege to ask a question or two before we get to the audience questions. And the first one is for Sigal. And that was quite an impressive reach code that Burlingame has passed. And can you tell us a little bit about, and also, as you've heard, access to charging is extremely important to even enable someone to think about getting an electric vehicle. And it's much less expensive to put the EV chargers in during building rather than retrofitting buildings or parking lots. So Sigal, can you tell us a little bit more about the process for putting in your reach code? Was there pushback from entities, or how did it go?
Yeah, the REACH code itself was part of a bigger package of going all electric to encourage new buildings to use all electric appliances. I'd say there was more pushback around that. Not so much in maybe the Bay Area, because REACH codes have been spreading around here, going like through a wave. There's quite a few cities that have already adopted it right when we were adopting it, and adding the EV component was pretty easy. We have quite a few large multifamily developers in Burlingame that we talked with one-on-one to really understand the challenges of providing access to all units. So for example, while it's really easy to maybe commit to putting in 10% of units level 2, well, if you put a level 2 parking charging station for every unit, that really changes the cost for the developer. So we agreed with them to provide at least 10% level 2, and then the remaining 90% for each parking spot to have access to just a regular outlet. Because a lot of people with EVs could still just plug into a standard outlet and have their car charged by the morning. So it doesn't always need to be a fast charging or level 2, and a standard outlet could be just as valuable for multifamily buildings.
Thank you. Hopefully many of the other municipalities on the call will consider reach codes for EVs. I'm going to move to some of the audience questions, and we have a couple that are related. Laura asks, what are your thoughts, and this could be for anyone on the panel, what are your thoughts on the ecological price to harvest the materials needed for batteries and how that can be sustainably managed? And Kirsten asked, I've heard some folks at the state not prioritize EV transition due to the embedded energy to make EVs as opposed to transit or getting folks to drive less. Can the panelists speak to the embedded energy critique? So does anyone want to take that one? Sure, Janelle.
Yeah, sure. So, unfortunately, all the stuff we use for mobility often involves having to dig stuff out of the ground and create emissions and cut up the earth. That's kind of how humans are with our natural resources. We use them. And so, a great option, the cleanest option would be biking and walking and public transit. But 86% of our commutes take place in a private vehicle. And we've got 9 years to cut emissions. So the only realistic thing is to move people into EVs right now. That's the most deployable option given the extreme urgency of cutting emissions. And so yes, there will be a bump as we have emissions of manufacturing the vehicles. Maybe there'll be a way to convert vehicles, but it's still it's not perfect, but between that and continuing with gas cars, EVs are a much greener all in all option.
Yeah, I would agree with Janelle. So some life cycle analysis of manufacturing electric vehicles versus gas vehicles show that there could be a 15 to 60% increase in life cycle energy and carbon emissions for manufacturing an electric vehicle. But that energy and greenhouse gas emissions would be paid back in 3 months to a year and a half of driving the electric vehicle, and that's on the national grid. So here in California, it'd be about half. So for even the long range battery electrics, less than a year, and then the next 10 or 20 years of driving it is a huge reduction in emissions. Another thing is that a lot of those life cycle analysis don't take into account the rapid progress that's being made on recycling batteries. And some of the tech companies out Silicon Valley are doing a really good job. So I've heard some of them have already reached cost parity at recycling lithium batteries. And one of the greatest sources of lithium in America is in consumers' drawers right now. So hopefully we'll see a lot more battery recycling progress as we get more used EV batteries. Let's see, I'm gonna go to a question by Laura, who's asking, how can we get the heavy duty trucking industry to switch? They seem to be on the road all day, every day, and driving through the fence line communities with all their emissions and noise pollution.
I mean, I would say we are in California. We're fortunate that we have the California Air Resources Board that is continually putting out policy for trucks and heavy duty vehicles, and for them to keep pushing the envelope, because for small cities, that's a hard one to take on. So we look to the state to really put in those policies.
Anyone else? I might add that CARB has policies to reduce or to increase the usage of medium and heavy duty EVs for buses, for trucks. So it's all happening. And yes, we are lucky that we have CARB driving that, because cities can't do much about it, even though they have the impacts of the pollution. Nick asks, what about other electric transportation like bikes and scooters? Any ways to get vendors to install in your city? And then he's also asking, what are the possibility of using hydrogen for large vehicles like fire trucks and garbage trucks?
I don't know too much about hydrogen. I know it seemed that the technology choice has been electric, but I don't know if that'll be the same as we continue with the trucks and heavy duty. So I can't really speak to that. And then what was the question about the e-mobility, the scooters and bikes? Can you repeat that?
What about other electric transportation like bikes and scooters? Any way to get vendors to install in your city?
Yeah, we would love to have vendors installed in our city for that. I think there's a lot of potential. Other presentations I've seen of cities, and I don't mean the bigger cities maybe, but some of the ones that are more size like Burlingame, at first, a lot of that e-mobility just doesn't necessarily replace vehicles traveled or miles. It's more leisure or fun to go around. But I think as a community gets used to going around with a bicycle or scooter, that could grow to take care of commuting and errands and last mile. But we're challenged, being small and wanting to be able to have enough economies of scale for a program to come to our city. So right now we're working with our neighboring cities to see if there could be some sort of partnership to maybe bring in a bike share or e-scooter program to our area.
Anyone else have insights on micromobility? Carlos or Janelle, are there any micromobility projects in your regions?
So for City of Torrance, we're working with South Bay Council of Governments on a regional connection, establishing open space corridors or rails to trails, that way we can provide that infrastructure for, active transportation options. I guess going back to that question regarding the hydrogen option, the city of Torrance, as many may know, we do have a refinery on, within our city, but we also do have a lot of technology companies that are looking at other alternative energy sources. So we actually do have a hydrogen station in the city, in which I know it's more for personal use, but it is more, I guess it does help the city or meet our goal towards, looking at, alternative energy sources. And that's kind of the approach that we're taking, is from a climate action as well as climate adaptation plan perspective. We are looking to working with both what we can do as the city as well as with our other stakeholders towards that goal of abandoning gasoline or encouraging vehicles such as heavy vehicles to use alternative energy sources.
Thank you. Another question about, do we have any resources that we can share regarding policies for agencies to delineate the legality between fleet-only charging versus public charging? That is what is preventing our agency from moving forward with implementing chargers for the public.
Meaning that they're having a trouble installing fleet-only charging that won't be accessible to the public? I didn't quite understand.
Maybe, I don't quite understand either, but that's what it sounds like, the fleet-only charging versus public charging.
I guess we, maybe Torrance, City of Torrance we haven't quite hit that challenge yet.
Yeah, we haven't had that issue between the two different offerings. I think the way we approached it with this pilot program is we wanted to offer it so that's publicly accessible for all, not necessarily just for our fleet vehicles. We really wanted to see what the demand would be like, and then over time seeing if the pilot program would be expandable, whether there's a demand to expand as well as encourage other private developments to also implement public EV stations on their properties. With phase 2, now we're focusing on getting grant funding to be able to electrify our fleet, and that so it's, I guess for us it's kind of reverse, but in terms of a legal standpoint, I don't think we've ever came across that issue.
Yeah, I haven't ever come across that issue with any of the cities that we work with as well. So the attendee may want to go back to their legal counsel or find out what the exact barrier is. I know with many of the incentive programs, there'll be specific programs that, like, for instance, Southern California Edison's Charge Ready 2 program, which is going to install over 30,000 charging stations throughout SCE territory. There's specific buckets of funding that you can go to do fleet-only charging. You can also do charging for the public. So many of the grant programs allow you to do fleet-only charging as well as public charging. So I haven't heard about any issues with the legality, and I think a lot of the incentive programs would actually encourage those different types of installs. We have a question that says, public charge stations are not as desirable as home charging. The best thing about EV use is you can charge at home during low energy rates. Public charge stations will never replace the current arrangement of gas stations. Do we really need to go there? Very expensive and don't handle the demand.
Early on, when we started our EV action plan, we did do a survey to our residents, and I agree that residents people prefer to charge at home and take advantage of lower electricity rates. But just, being able to support those long commutes or long distance drivers and the high percentage of multifamily units in our area, we do believe some level of public charging is needed. Also, we hope to grow car sharing. So while our reach codes really will make sure that all new developments have charging for people to charge at home, some support for public charging is still needed.
Yeah, I would agree with Sigal that public charging is extremely important for people who don't have access to charging at home, which is a large portion of potential EV drivers. And also, one way that public agencies can help to ensure affordable EV charging is to offer their EV charging with time of use rates. So the city of Santa Barbara actually does this, and they charge 20 cents per kilowatt hour. And a rough rule of thumb is 20 cents per kilowatt hour is like paying $2 per gallon for gas. For most of the time, between 9 p.m. all night, all day till 4 p.m. the next day. And then between that peak time, 4 to 5, they charge 35 cents a kilowatt hour. So this helps the grid as well as enables those who don't have access to home charging to get affordable EV charging and reap the benefits. So I'd really encourage any city there that can set the price of their charging to move to time of use to really enable those things. And I think that was the last question. Is someone from LGC gonna do a wrap up?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Michael, and our speakers for that really interesting presentation. I just want to give another shout out to wonderful sponsors one more time. And to remind everyone of the next few events starting this afternoon with planning for existing building electrification, as well as the rest of the events this week that you can see on the screen. Lastly, please provide your feedback for this session for a chance to win a $50 gift card at the link here that we're going to be sending through the chat. Thanks everyone for joining, and we're excited to see you at the next event.